Good morning, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. It's indeed a pleasure to be here with you one more time. And today we'll be discussing an article, an editorial in the Jamaican newspaper, the Daily Gleaner, that I came across yesterday. And the Gleaner was suggesting, of course, that the municipal elections, which are just about um, to be had, that 38% of Jamaicans will be showing up to vote for the elections. And that, to the Gleaner, to the editor of the Gleaner, is a record number, right? Given the fact that many voters in Jamaica are, show they are not particularly interested in what is happening in the political scene because they understand that the two parties are controlled, right, by the PSOJ and the global elites, right? They understand that this is nothing for them, that politics does not really bring any benefits, any real benefits to them. And the Gleaner, pointed out something that I thought was very interesting. Looking at the polls, right? According to the survey conducted by Don Anderson's Market Research Services Limited, 60% of registered voters held out the possibility of casting ballots. Only 38%, however, were certain that they would, and 22% were not sure. But this category, as Mr. Anderson pointed out, moves little. Then there is debate 40% of non-voters. This group will, in all likelihood, grow substantially larger. So this is speculation, but there is something here that the Gleaner pointed out about right. I think it's right here. 7 in 10 Jamaicans believe they live in a corrupt country, with nearly half having the faith in the legislature and key institutions of the state, right? This is so 7 in 10. That's 70%. And the editor of the Gleaner continues rather to articulate in a 2021 survey by Vanderbilt University's Laptop Research Laboratory, 45% declared dissatisfaction with the island's democracy, and 46% say they would tolerate a military coup if the aim was to fight corruption, right? So this is very concerning, right? This should be concerning to all well-thinking Jamaicans. And this survey was done in 2021, so 2 years ago, right? So 45% declared dissatisfaction with the island's democracy, and 46% say they would tolerate a military coup if the aim was to fight corruption. This is almost 50%. A little more than half would accept an executive coup by a strong man leader who bent the rules if he got things done, right? So what we have in Jamaica essentially is an inefficient government, right? An ineffective, a government that is catastrophically incompetent, right? Because if the government was effective, if the government was in any way competent, then we know that Jamaicans would not be seeking a strongman, right? Even if he should bend the rule, they're saying, once he gets things done, that they are willing to go with that strongman. Now, what country can we operate given this sort of crisis, right? In democracy, as the Gleaner asserts. Now, we've got to think if we are going to continue like this. Now, we cannot forget that the BBC, right, in 2011, had a report done which says Jamaicans would have been better off British, right? And this was actually a poll done in 2011, right? And so even at that time, Jamaicans were not comfortable, right, at all with what was transpiring politically on the island, right? So a survey, says the BBC, a survey for a Jamaican newspaper suggests most islanders believe the country would have been better off if it had remained a British colony. I remember this when this poll was taken. The poll commissioned by the Gleaner found that 60% of respondents backed this view, but 17% disagreed. 1,000 people took part in the survey out of a population of 2.7 million people. The poll has reported a margin of error of plus or minus. Jamaica is due to celebrate 50 years of independence next year, right? So before we celebrated our 50th anniversary of independence, right, people were already suggesting, the citizens were suggesting and preferred, were intimating that they would have preferred to be under British rule. And that did not open the eyes of our political leaders on the island, right? They seem to have been okay with that perception. And one of the things that is not said in these newspapers, even the BBC and the Gleaner and the Jamaica Observer, is that they don't contextualize the whole concept of why the Jamaican citizens would prefer to be under British rule. Evidently, they must understand that the British were once our colonizers, right? And they were our slave masters, right? So the fact of the former, I should say, they were our former slave masters. So I'm not sure if the people are that stupid, right, to believe that the queen or the king right now would have been better to lead us. However, corruption in Jamaica is so rife, right, that people are willing to take anything right now. They realize that the local politicians are no much better, perhaps worse, than their former slave overlords and masters, right? And that is something that the politicians need to be aware of and need to be concerned about. Now, this letter was a letter to the editor of the Jamaica Observer, and it says, happy that many prefer the monarchy. And this was also written on July 4th, 2011, after the poll was conducted that Jamaicans preferred to be with the reigning monarchy rather than becoming independent. And that was the year prior to our 50th, the celebration of our 50th anniversary of independence, political independence, that is. He says here, I was extremely pleased to see the results of a Bill Johnson poll, which stated that most Jamaicans prefer to keep the monarchy in the Constitution rather than replace it with a Republican system. It shows that most Jamaicans prefer to remain loyal to Queen and country rather than to politicians. I would like to draw attention to an important issue surrounding the proposed changes, although there are some who want to send the Queen packing. So one of the things that is almost very interesting in Jamaica is that there are so many different agendas, right? That it's sometimes very difficult to piece through what the pulse of the island is, what is really happening on that island. Because we do know that the elites have their agenda, and it's not the agenda that favors the masses, the Black masses, right? Those who are struggling, right? Those who are barely surviving. But it is to further enrich their pockets. That is their agenda, right? Their agenda is not for the ordinary Jamaican to be equal to them, all right? So the fact of the matter is that because their agenda is distinct, then perhaps they want to sever ties with the Queen, because then they'll be able to, to get the respect that the Queen symbolically receives, or the king right now, right? Symbolically receives, right? And that will, ingratiate, it will also propel them to a new sense of kingship and lordship over the people that live on the island, right? And that, I think, is their agenda. The people understand that the politicians do not desire to improve the lives of the masses down there. And if they do desire, they seem not to be able to do anything, right, to implement policies that would accomplish that particular goal, right? So what they desire now is to brainwash the people into believing that, because the elites want to sever ties with Great Britain, that is the desire also. That is the sentiment shared by the majority of the populace. But that is not so, right? The masses of people understand, right? Because here we now in 2023, right? And we're seeing where 7 out of 10 Jamaicans are saying that they find the leaders or leaders or political leaders to be corrupt. And for that reason, they're not interested in casting their vote, right? And they would prefer a strong man, even if he has to bend the law, even if they would have to have a military coup, they would prefer that. We have to be careful what we desire too, because I remember in 2010 when we had the Tivoli Gardens incursion, that not much changed after that. In fact, it seemed like things got worse after Dudus was taken. In a short time, after he departed the island, it seems to me that crime and violence had gone down a little within the corporate area, right? But afterwards, it seems that the criminals started, migrating to the rural parts of Jamaica, where they are wreaking havoc, right? And things have gotten worse since then because, back then, people in the rural areas, for the most part, thought that they were safer than, and I should say relatively safer than people who were living in the corporate area in the urban centers in Jamaica. However, in today's Jamaica, nowhere is safe, right? Even in Mandeville, in deep rural Mandeville, no one is safe, right, from the hoodlums. So we've got to be careful because that sort of incursion, which was carried out by the military in Jamaica and joint efforts from the United States, did not solve the problem, right? And this was being described as this gigantic drug kingpin, right? And that if they had just taken him away, then things, or crime and violence would have been solved. The problem of crime and violence would have been solved. And that did not happen, right? So Jamaicans have to be very, very careful of wanting, a military coup. Be careful of what you desire, because that too could end up very disastrous, right? So I just wanted to share this with you because it is something that we all well-thinking Jamaicans who live on the soil and those who are abroad should be concerned about. We ought not to think that democracy is just, mere going to the polls and voting for one of the two parties which are practically controlled by the elites, right? Because that's not the essence of democracy, right? If these governments, if the politicians are not doing things in the interest of the citizens, if their lives are not being improved, if they cannot, live safely in their own country, then what's the purpose of democracy, right? If their lives are being snuffed out so frequently and without any form of justice, then I don't see the purpose of living in what they're calling a democracy. And I don't want to talk about the fact that, sometimes we use Professor Orlando Patterson's phrase in which democracies are valid, right? We can't continue to argue like that. We have to find some means, some ways, right, of correcting this problem. Because without national security, then what's the purpose having a country? Because that country is dysfunctional, right? If people cannot walk around, if they cannot even live in their own homes, in a secured manner, right? So I think that we need to take stock, right? And that the Gleaner and the Jamaica Observer need to contextualize the problem. They need to do more investigative journalism, right? They're not doing a great job. They're not doing a fantastic job. It's interesting to see how they like to talk about, unskilled, laborers in the market, and they're not competent. But what we're seeing coming from the University of the West Indies and those, academic centers for training journalists in Jamaica is much more to be desired, right? We're not seeing that kind of journalism in which, the journalists are actually digging into the levels of corruption that we are witnessing happening in Jamaica. But I understand that they have to protect their lives because they are not going to be secure if they should unravel, right? If they should disclose some of what is happening in the inner sanctums of our political uh, leaders' actions and what they do from day to day, right? We've got to take stock. We've got to really begin to assess the problem, to examine the problem, and to find effective solutions so that we can have a better and peaceful society called Jamaica. Thank you so much for joining. I look forward to seeing you in another discussion.